Hello and welcome to Unacademy. A very good morning and welcome to the daily Hindu news analysis. So let's begin today's discussion by first looking at the topics that we are going to discuss. From the Delhi edition of the Hindu, I have chosen 6 important articles. There are 3 articles that are very important for our mains exam and 3 small articles that are relevant for the prelims. So let's carry out a detailed analysis of all these articles so that you don't have to go back and read the newspaper again. If you guys are liking our initiatives, do support us with your likes and comments and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Before we start, we have an announcement about Conquer Prelims, which is a free crash course which is going on both on our YouTube channel and as well as on our Unacademy app. As part of the static crash course where we are covering the most important static topics for the upcoming prelims, today Hima Bindu ma'am will be taking the third session for Science and Technology on the Unacademy app at 6 p.m. And as part of the current affairs part of the crash course, Mukesh sir will be taking up the second session for Environment and Ecology right here on our YouTube channel tonight at 7:30 p.m. So do ensure that you watch these sessions live and make use of the Conquer Prelims crash course to help you prepare for the upcoming prelims exam. You can access both the sessions very easily by just joining our Telegram channel where we are sharing the links of these sessions right before the session goes live. So you just have to click on the links to watch these classes. So do join the Telegram channel as well. So with this, let's begin with the first topic. Let's look at this important column from page number 12. The topic is very important for internal security under GS paper 3. This article is examining the recent allegations brought up by the National Investigation Agency against the Naga insurgent outfit NSCN-IM. It has been alleged by the National Investigation Agency that NSCN-IM has been having links with few Manipur-based insurgent groups, especially the Meitei armed insurgent outfits. And this collusion between NSCN-IM and the armed Meitei insurgent outfits represents a major security concern for India. The NIA has recently filed a charge sheet in relation to the Manipur ethnic violence that broke out last year, and NIA has alleged that the Naga insurgent outfit NSCN-IM is in collusion with few Meitei armed groups. So this topic is not only interesting but also very, very important as far as the security of Northeast India is concerned. As you all know, Northeast India has witnessed decades of insurgency and the region has been destabilized right from 1947. India had managed to contain Naga insurgency over the years, and in fact today the Naga peace process is also taking place with NSCN-IM. But the recent charges filed by NIA, where it's alleging that NSCN-IM, which is the Isaac Muiwa faction of the National Socialist Council of Nagaland, it is allegedly backing a few Meitei insurgent groups such as the PLA, the People's Liberation Army, and the KYKL, which are banned terrorist outfits as per the Ministry of Home Affairs. Under the Unlawful Activities Prevention Act, all these armed insurgent groups, they are banned terrorist organizations according to the Ministry of Home Affairs. So given the scale of ethnic violence that Manipur has recently witnessed between Meitei armed groups and the Kuki-Zo armed groups, these allegations acquire a lot of significance because allegedly from the neighboring state of Nagaland, the Isaac Muiwa faction of NSCN has been backing and supporting some of these Meitei armed insurgent groups. So in this context, it becomes important to examine this entire topic in complete detail. Before we talk about the current concerns that have come up, you need to understand the brief history of Naga insurgency. You should know what is NSCN-IM, what's the current status of the Naga peace process which is going on, and you should also know about the ethnic situation in Manipur and how these groups are linked to each other and what kind of threat does it pose to India. So let's begin with the basics of Naga insurgency. Let's understand the root of Naga insurgency which happens to be the oldest insurgency that India has been dealing with. Naga insurgency has been going on right from 1947. It happens to be the oldest, the longest lasting insurgency that India has dealt with. And even today, the challenges and problems continue as far as Naga insurgency is concerned. So if you look at the history, the origin of this insurgent movement, the origin goes all the way back to the colonial times. In late 1800s, the British would expand their colonial control towards northeast India by annexing the Naga Hills, which largely constitutes today's state of Nagaland. By 1881, the British had expanded their colonial interests, and British enterprises like East India Company had firmly kept their eyes on northeast India, primarily because of its forest resources and also due to its connection with Southeast Asia. So in 1881, the Naga Hills would be colonized, and the British would notice the martial skills of the Naga clan. When we say Nagas, it refers to a very broad ethnic group found not just in northeast India but also found in the neighboring country of Myanmar. So today, for example, if you look at other states as well in northeast India like Assam, Arunachal Pradesh, Manipur and Mizoram, right? In all these states as well, you find subgroups of Nagas. There are Nagas found in neighboring country of Myanmar as well, apart from the Nagas found in Nagaland. So collectively, this entire ethnic group called the Nagas, right, they were noticed for their martial skills, their war fighting skills, their jungle warfare, guerrilla warfare tactics by the British. So by identifying these war fighting skills of the Nagas, the British recruited some of the Naga soldiers into the British Indian forces during the First World War. When the First World War was being fought, few Naga soldiers who were specialists in jungle and guerrilla warfare were recruited by the British Indian Army, and they saw action around the world in various theatres of conflict. So some of these Naga commandos would eventually form a political outfit after the First World War came to an end, called the Naga Club. So these Naga soldiers who were returning back from conflict, now they had gained wartime experience, wartime knowledge. They understood the concept of nationalism, how around the world countries were built on nationalist lines on the basis of identity, such as ethnicity, religion, language, etc. So after coming back from the First World War, some of the members of Naga Club, who now had the political awareness and global awareness, they started raising the demand for independence for Naga areas. By then, India's freedom struggle also had gained momentum. So the Nagas, who had leverage with the British, they insisted that if ever India is granted independence, then Naga areas should not be included as part of the Indian Union. Given the distinct identity, the cultural ethnic identity of the Nagas, the members of Naga Club insisted after the First World War that Naga area should be given independence and should not be merged with India. So in a way, the British supported and encouraged these sentiments amongst the Nagas as well. In fact, in 1928, when the Simon Commission visited India to review the functioning of the Montagu-Chelmsford reforms of 1919, members of Naga Club sought a representation. They met the Simon Commission and submitted a memorandum urging for Naga independence if India were ever made independent. Their demand was that Naga area should not be merged with India, should not be included with the rest of India, given the distinct cultural identity of the people of Naga. Their goal, their ambition was to create Nagalim, or a greater Naga land, by uniting all the Naga inhabited areas, both in India and Myanmar. Their goal was always to bring all the Naga subgroups together from parts of Assam, Manipur, Mizoram, Arunachal, and of course today's Nagaland, and even from parts of Myanmar, and bring all these Naga inhabited areas together to form a separate nation called Nagalim or Greater Nagaland. That was the primary demand. Then came the Second World War. Even in the Second World War, members of Naga Club, they had now established a political grouping called NNC, the Naga National Council. The Naga Club had transformed itself into the NNC, the Naga National Council. So the soldiers of the Naga group, they would fight for the British Indian Army during Second World War as well. So as a return favor, they would expect the Naga identity to be protected and Naga areas to be granted independence, to be kept separate from the Indian Union. So following the Second World War, the Naga soldiers who returned, right, they had political awareness, they had the required military skills, they had gained a lot of strategic knowledge as well. And they would insist by 1946-47 that Naga areas should not be merged with India at any cost. This was a very strong demand led by the NNC, the Naga National Council, which came to be the political representative of the Naga community. So right before India's independence, before August 15, 1947, the British, they struck a deal with the Nagas, with the NNC. The then governor of Assam, Akbar Hyder, would negotiate with NNC leaders, and the British signed the 9-point agreement, also called Akbar Hyder agreement. Under this agreement, the British refused to grant independence because leaders of Indian National Congress, they had outright rejected the demand for Naga independence. Because if the Naga demand had been accepted, similar demands would arise from many other parts of the country and a strong Indian Union could have never been created. So the then Indian leaders, led by Nehru and others, rejected the demand of the Nagas and insisted that the British should not honor this demand. So this led the British to sign the Akbar Hyder agreement with leaders of NNC, the 9-point agreement. So under this agreement, instead of independence, they promised constitutional autonomy. They promised constitutional autonomy in the future Indian constitution, that Naga areas would be an integral part of India. India will have full sovereignty over the Naga territories, but constitutional autonomy would be provided to protect Naga rights, and this would be embedded in the future Indian constitution that would be drafted. This was a concession that the initial Indian government was okay with. So after signing Akbar Hyder agreement, some of the Naga leaders of the NNC, they rebelled against the deal. They refused to accept the terms of the deal. And even before India could actually become independent, NNC leaders unilaterally declared Naga independence. On August 14, 1947, the rebel extremist leaders of NNC, they declared war against the Indian state, which was yet to become independent. And that is how India's first and oldest insurgency began. The Naga insurgency had broken out even before India became independent. Right? So since then, until date, the Naga insurgency remains a major security problem for India. So throughout late 1940s, 1950s, the insurgency led by NNC would escalate. It would destabilize the northeast region, and India would deploy the army and Assam rifles to counter the threat. And very soon, the AFSPA was also introduced. The Armed Forces Special Powers Act was brought back. This was a colonial era law, very controversial law, which was used by the British during Quit India movement, even during partition as well. AFSPA had been a tool in the hands of the British mainly to curb the national movement. It had given extraordinary powers to the security forces, including the right to kill. It granted security forces immunity when they were deployed in disturbed areas. So post-independence, India had decided not to bring AFSPA back. It was briefly used only during the partition to deal with the communal violence, but after that, AFSPA had not been brought back. But given the threat posed by Naga insurgency led by NNC, the Naga National Council, AFSPA was reintroduced in Nagaland, in the Naga areas, which essentially they were part of the larger state of Assam. So under the powers of AFSPA, the Indian forces, they carried out effective counter-insurgency operations. Led by the Indian Army and Assam Rifles, the NNC rebels were targeted, and by late 1950s, early 1960s, the NNC was actually weakened. Naga insurgency had been weakened, and India opened negotiations with this insurgent group. These negotiations led to another agreement called 16-point agreement, through which the government of India promised to create Nagaland as a separate state. Because please note, until 1963, right, Nagaland was not a separate state. The Naga areas were part of the larger state of Assam. The statehood demand was met by India. India said separate state would be created, which would help in protecting the rights and the land and culture of the Nagas. And in return, autonomy was also promised, constitutional autonomy. But eventually, this agreement would also fail. India would set up Nagaland as a separate state by 1963, But the other leaders of NNC, they would rebel against the deal. They would not compromise. They would not agree for anything short of independence. And some of the extremist insurgent leaders, they rejected the deal. So thus the war continued through the 1960s. The ceasefire had broken down. Throughout this period, the NNC extremists, they got support from hostile neighbors like Pakistan. Through East Pakistan, Pakistani state agencies like the ISI would shelter the insurgents of NNC, provide arms, funds and support and training, and create a shelter, a safe haven for these Northeast insurgent outfits. India also believes that China also had a role to play, especially after the 1962 war between India and China. It's believed that China started destabilizing the Northeast region by using Myanmar as a base to support several Northeast insurgent groups. And one such outfit which received Chinese support was the NNC, the Naga insurgents. So by 1970s, the Naga insurgency was indeed a credible threat for India. But thanks to the liberation of Bangladesh, right, as India played a decisive role in breaking Pakistan into two and liberating Bangladesh, right, East Pakistan ceased to exist. With this, the safe havens that were available for Northeast insurgents was also wiped out. This was a huge breakthrough for India. It was a big step for India. With the loss of these bases in East Pakistan, groups like NNC, they started to weaken. Now they could no longer operate with impunity against India. They could no longer get easy state support from Pakistan. They couldn't access funds or weapons. They had nowhere to hide. Plus, Indian forces had stepped up their security operations. So this pushed NNC again to negotiate with India, which led to the Shillong Accord. The Shillong Accord of 1975. Through the Shillong Accord, India again reiterated those promises. Statehood demand had already been met. By 1963, Nagaland had been set up as a separate state. So through the Shillong Accord, a provision was added where the NNC insurgents could surrender, and those who hadn't committed any extreme crimes or heinous crimes, they would be pardoned by the Indian state. Cases would not be pursued against them. They would be given an opportunity to come back into the mainstream, enter mainstream politics as well. And in return, we would agree for certain autonomous provisions so that the Naga community can protect its own identity, culture and land and rights. So Shillong Accord was supposed to bring Naga insurgency to an end by 1975 at least. But again, there was a shocking development for India. There was a U-turn by some of the extremist Naga leaders. Even after signing the Shillong Accord, some of the Naga rebels, led by Isaac, Muiwa and Kaplang, they rejected the Shillong Accord. They rejected the Shillong Accord as well. They broke away from NNC. And they went on to establish the most notorious Northeast insurgent outfit in 1980, which is nothing but the NSCN, the National Socialist Council of Nagaland. This is how NSCN was born, under the leadership of Isaac, Muiwa and Kaplang. So under the leadership of these Naga insurgents, NSCN was established. They broke away from NNC, they rejected the Shillong Accord and established NSCN to lead the next stage of Naga insurgency against the government of India. So as a result, the Naga insurgency continued, the state of war continued. Over the years, the NSCN has broken into different factions as well. Because of ideological differences between these leaders, the NSCN split into two main factions. The NSCN, which was established in 1980, it split into two factions, the IM faction, led by Isaac and Muiwa, and the Kaplang faction, led by Kaplang. The Isaac Muiwa faction would mainly get support in Bangladesh, because by 1970s, 1980s, Bangladesh had fallen under military rule. The pro-India government under Sheikh Mujibur Rahman had been toppled by the Bangladeshi army, which was pro-Pakistan. So pro-Pakistan military regime had come back in Bangladesh, and the support for Northeast insurgency again started in Bangladesh. So NSCN-IM got easy support in Bangladesh, and the Kaplang faction would easily get support in Myanmar. So again, there was an involvement of the hostile neighbors such as China and Pakistan. Pakistan reportedly supported the IM faction through Bangladesh. China reportedly backed the Kaplang faction primarily through Myanmar. And don't forget, Nagas are present in Myanmar as well, and some of them, right, would extend support to the extremists as well. So as a result, the challenge continued for India. India stepped up the security operations, and eventually we managed to weaken these groups, and both the factions actually signed a ceasefire with the government of India. In fact, in 1997, the Isaac Muiwa faction signed a ceasefire agreement. Later, by 2001, the Kaplang faction also signed a ceasefire agreement with India. But neither of the groups have actually followed the ceasefire. They haven't surrendered their arms, they haven't ended their extremist activities, and they continue to be involved in organized crime. They continue to run drug cartels, they continue to be involved in arms trafficking, human trafficking, and this brings a lot of revenue for these insurgent groups. And in the name of Naga insurgency, these groups have essentially turned into criminal gangs, running these criminal cartels in Northeast India with links in Myanmar. So the challenge has continued for India. Of course, the degree of the threat has gone down. Naga insurgency was at its peak in 1950s and 60s, later in 1980s as well. So compared to that, definitely the scale of violence, the extent of the activities of these groups has gone down. India has done quite well to tackle the threat. But these groups still remain active. In fact, in 2015, India achieved a major breakthrough. The Modi government struck a deal with the IM faction of NSCN, the Isaac Muiwa faction, right, which had been dismantled because of the support we got in Bangladesh, signed a historic framework agreement with the government of India in 2015. The reason why NSCN-IM signed a framework agreement for initiating the peace process is because by 2009-2010, they lost the support in Bangladesh. We saw the emergence of a friendly government in Bangladesh under Awami League, led by Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina. So Bangladesh would now provide complete support to India, and under the then Prime Minister Manmohan Singh, India would launch major operations targeting these insurgent groups with the support of Bangladesh. So Bangladesh would target the safe havens that these Northeast insurgents enjoyed in Bangladesh, and thanks to the joint efforts of India and Bangladesh, most of the support bases that existed for these groups was dismantled. Many of the top insurgents were handed over to India. They were extradited to India by Bangladesh, and Bangladesh would destroy the terror camps, the funding and the armed routes, the supply routes which were there, thus destroying the logistic support for these insurgent outfits. So following this, IM faction had no other option but to talk to the Indian government and start a peace process. So in 2015, a historic agreement was signed. The Isaac Muiwa faction appeared to surrender, and it signed the framework agreement on Naga peace process, which initiated the negotiations between Government of India, the Government of Nagaland, and as well as the NSCN-IM faction. But however, you might ask what happened to the other faction, the Kaplang faction. The Kaplang faction has refused to surrender. It has refused to be a part of the peace process. If you look at NSCN-K, NSCN Kaplang, it continues to be in a state of war against India. It reportedly has support in Myanmar and continues to operate along the China-Myanmar border. So this group remains active, and it even opposed the Naga peace process. In fact, within few days after the framework agreement was signed between Government of India and NSCN-IM faction, the Kaplang faction retaliated against the agreement by carrying out a brutal terror attack against the Indian army. If you guys have seen the movie Uri, that deals with India's surgical strikes in Pakistan, right? The movie opens with a scene in Manipur. You might have seen the opening scene where an Indian army convoy is attacked by a certain Northeast insurgent outfit, right? Which leads India to conduct a surgical strike in Myanmar as well, right? That is where the movie is set. This is a real incident depicted in the movie, and it's this incident that I'm referring to. There was a brutal attack carried out by NSCN Kaplang targeting the Indian Army near the Myanmar border. This was a direct retaliation for the agreement between Government of India and NSCN-IM. So NSCN Kaplang remains a threat. It remains an active insurgent group, continues to operate in China-Myanmar border, and reportedly still gets support from China. But on the other hand, we were under the impression that IM faction had surrendered. It was really interested in striking out a peace deal. So over the last almost 9 years, the negotiations have continued, but still there is no peace agreement. There has been no Naga peace agreement. In fact, new disputes, new issues have come up. The Government of India appointed R.N. Ravi as the envoy, and to facilitate the peace process, R.N. Ravi was even made the governor of Nagaland. R.N. Ravi was someone who had experience with Northeast insurgency. He was a former IPS officer, served with the Intelligence Bureau as a special director who led covert operations against Northeast insurgent groups. So post-retirement, R.N. Ravi was appointed as the envoy to talk to NSCN-IM and other Naga political factions and groups to strike a Naga peace accord so that Naga insurgency can be brought to an end. R.N. Ravi was even made the governor of the state, governor of Nagaland. But during these talks, major differences would come up between R.N. Ravi and NSCN-IM. The NSCN-IM would continue to be involved in organized crime. Even though it brought its insurgency to an end, it was still involved in extortion. It would threaten local businesses, local traders, and extract ransom from them, extract weekly, monthly hafta payments or ransom, right, which would basically fund the activities of this armed group. It truly didn't surrender. Even though it stopped its insurgency, it would still be involved in extortion, kidnapping, and other illegal activities. It has been actively involved in drug smuggling, arms smuggling, etc. And this led R.N. Ravi to call out the criminal activities of NSCN-IM. In the Hindu newspaper itself, the then governor R.N. Ravi wrote an article, a column, accusing NSCN-IM of behaving like a criminal gang. This led to major clash between the two sides, and the peace process has been derailed. Later, R.N. Ravi was shifted out and made the governor of Tamil Nadu, where R.N. Ravi has created further controversy, a new controversy altogether. But the peace process has basically hit a dead end. It's been a stalemate. Also, NSCN-IM's demands are not feasible to be met by the Government of India. The NSCN-IM is insisting on a separate flag, a separate constitution, something similar to what J&K had under Article 370. Now, given that the Modi government has revoked the special status of J&K under Article 370, it's politically highly unviable for the Government of India to provide similar measures for the Naga region, for Nagaland, as part of the peace process. So these demands have been rejected by the Government of India. The demand for a separate flag, a separate constitution, and other constitutional autonomy features, they have been rejected by the Indian government. So that is why the peace process has hit a stalemate, and NSCN-IM continues to be involved in criminal activities. The Kaplang faction still remains in a state of war, remains an active insurgent group. Right? So this is what we thought until now. But there is a new development related to Manipur and what has happened in Manipur over the last few months. I'm sure all of you would have heard about the large-scale ethnic violence in Manipur that has broken out since the last 1 year. So here as well, there is a role of Naga insurgents. This is something which was known historically, but the new allegation by NIA concerning the support that NSCN-IM has been giving to some of the Meitei armed groups is indeed alarming for India. So let's quickly understand these links and what threats does this pose to India. See, you're looking at the map of Manipur here. This helps you understand the demography of Manipur, because the ethnic violence that Manipur has witnessed and the insurgency that Manipur has gone through before, it's primarily rooted in its ethnic problem. It's a demographic problem essentially. So if you look at Manipur, if you look at the geography of Manipur, the physical geography, right? The Imphal region is a valley region. Imphal region is a valley region and it's surrounded by mountains. So to the north, south, east and west, you have the hill areas of Manipur. the hills of Manipur, which is predominantly inhabited by various tribal communities. And you have the Imphal Valley region, where you have the majority dominant community, that is the Meiteis. So if you look at the history of Manipur, it was a princely state, right? The British never annexed Manipur entirely. They gave limited autonomy to the Meitei rulers, to the Meitei kingdom, the Manipuri kingdom essentially, right? This led the Meiteis to believe that they were always independent, that they were never part of British India. So eventually, when India pushed Manipur to integrate with the Indian Union following independence, there was resistance from the Meitei rulers, right? In Meiteis, majority of them are Meitei Hindus. There are some Meitei Muslims as well. So these were the royal elites. So they always perceived a sense of independence and autonomy, right? They believed even under British rule, they were always independent, which was not the case. It was only autonomy, a degree of autonomy given by the British to them, right? So by citing complete cultural disconnect and historical disconnect between Manipuri kingdom and rest of India, the Meiteis resisted the integration of Manipur with India. In fact, by 1949, when Manipur became an integral part of India, there was active resentment, resistance by the Meitei rulers and the Meitei elites against joining India. So this had already created a sense of resentment. Meiteis believed that India had forcefully annexed the region, forcefully pushed Manipur to join India. Then upon this, some of the minority hill-dwelling communities, ethnic groups, like Nagas and Kukis, they were given scheduled tribe status by the government of India. The hill-dwelling tribes like the Nagas and the Kukis, they were given ST status, scheduled tribe status. So what happens due to scheduled tribe status? The Nagas and Kukis would enjoy a degree of protection, right? A degree of constitutional protection for tribal land. So basically the Meiteis from the valley, from the Imphal Valley, could not go to the hill areas to purchase tribal land. Whereas the Nagas and Kukis had no such restriction. Nagas and Kukis, they would come down to the valley areas, they could purchase Meitei land as well. So this primarily became an issue of land and identity. So if you look at the distribution of the Nagas, Nagas are primarily distributed in these districts to the north, northeast and northwest of Imphal Valley. For example, in Ukhrul, Senapati district, Tamenglong district, and in some of the other districts. This is where you find larger Naga concentration who are connected to the Naga group in Nagaland. Some of them have connections with extremist groups as well, such as NSCN. All right. Then you find the Kukis in districts like Churchandpur, Chandel, etc. In districts which are located to the south, southeast, southwest of Imphal Valley. This is where you primarily find the Kukis who are connected with the Zomi community. They are also connected with the Mizos from Mizoram, located to the south of here, and also to the Chin community from Myanmar. They have connections with the Chin community from Myanmar and also the Mizos from Mizoram. So these are the districts where you find the Kuki Zo community, which is at the center of the recent clashes and violence that has occurred. So Kukis were recognized as scheduled tribes, Nagas were recognized as scheduled tribes, and their tribal land was protected. Plus they would enjoy other benefits of ST status, from reservation to government subsidies, etc. So Meiteis felt discriminated. The majority Meiteis, they felt that Indian state was discriminating against them and it was protecting Nagas and Kukis. Based on this perception, the Meiteis started an insurgency back in 1960s. Few Meitei armed groups were formed, like PLA, People's Liberation Army, KYKL, and other Meitei armed insurgent groups were established in 1960s that led a major insurgency in the region. Because the Nagas in the hill areas, they had support of NNC and later NSCN, the Naga National Council, right? The Naga armed insurgent groups, they would extend support to the Naga hill residents in the tribal areas of Manipur. The Kuki Zo community would also establish their own armed movement later to demand the creation of a Kuki land. Their eventual goal would be to liberate the Kuki inhabited areas in India and the neighboring areas in Myanmar, where the Zomi community is found, to form a nation, a separate nation called Kuki land. So essentially, all these were separatist movements. Nagas were leading a separatist movement for Nagalim. Metis would also lead a separatist movement to break Manipur away and protect Metis rights. The Kuki-Zo community would also lead an insurgent movement for Kuki land. So this has been the complicated situation in Manipur, right? So in the past, there have been incidents where Naga insurgents have blocked the highways connecting with Manipur to cripple Manipur's economy. Whenever Nagas wanted to highlight their issue at the national level, or whenever they wanted to settle rivalries and scores with Metis, to punish the Metis and Manipur, they would blockade the highway as well, thus crippling Manipur's economy. So there has been a history of rivalry and enmity between these different groups, between the Kuki-Zo community and Metis, and as well as between the Nagas and Metis. That has been the equation for many decades. But now, something else is happening. There are new developments which are taking place here. See, if you look at the demographic breakup, Metis are in majority, accounting for nearly 53% of the state's population. Nagas, found in the hill areas like Ukrul, Chandel and other north and northeast, northwest districts, the hill districts, right? That's where the Nagas are found, accounting for 17% of the state's population, approximately. The Kuki-Zo community, found in Churchandpur and other districts to the south, closer to the border with Myanmar, they account for nearly 26% of the state's population. So Nagas and Kuki-Zo community, around 34 different groups, subgroups, they have been recognized as scheduled tribes. So they have a higher degree of protection, their land is protected. The last year violence which began was basically over the same question, because there was a High Court ruling that Metis should be considered for scheduled tribe status as well. Based on the recommendations of a committee that had recommended in 2013 the provision of ST status for Metis as well, the High Court passed an order urging the Manipur government to consider providing ST status to Metis as well. So this created a situation where majority community would have gotten scheduled tribe status. This was resisted by the Kuki-Zo armed groups that eventually triggered the violence. Plus, of course, Metis were blaming the Kuki-Zo community for bringing refugees and insurgents from Myanmar, for encroaching upon on the tribal land in Manipur, right? But Kuki-Zo community has denied these allegations, right? And it's alleged that the Manipur government under Biren Singh has been biased in favor of the Metis. So there are two sides to this story. Metis blaming Kuki-Zo community, Manipur government also blames Kuki-Zo community. The Kuki-Zo community blames Metis and the Manipur government. Kuki-Zo community has alleged that Manipur government is favoring the Metis deliberately as part of the political developments in the state. So now, in the midst of this, the reports which indicate that Nagas and Metis have aligned and Nagas are likely backing the Metis groups is of great concern. According to NIA's charge sheet which has been filed, NSCN-IM, which is actually in a state of ceasefire with the Indian government, which is negotiating a peace accord, which is part of the Naga framework agreement on the peace process, allegedly is giving support, armed support to the Metis groups such as PLA, People's Liberation Army, and KYKL. These are notorious armed Metis insurgent outfits which have committed brutal acts of violence against Kuki-Zo community. Even Kuki-Zo armed groups have targeted Metis as well. So that has been the ethnic conflict which has been going on over the last 12 to 13 months. But the reports which state that NSCN-IM allegedly has given support through arms, funds, etc. to PLA and KYKL, which are Metis outfits. Now this is quite surprising because historically Naga insurgents and Metis insurgents were also rivals of each other. They were opposed to each other. But what might explain this collusion between the two would be the clashes between Kukis and Nagas which had occurred back in 1990s. Back in the 1990s, in the hill districts where you find both Kukis and Nagas, there have been clashes between the two scheduled tribes as well. This could be a possible reason, or maybe Nagas, they are targeting India in a way by backing the Metis armed groups. because they are not happy with the progress the peace process is making. Reports indicate that NSCN-IM also has found a new base in the China-Myanmar border. The NIA charge sheet indicates that NSCN-IM, which is supposed to be talking to the Indian government, working out a peace process, has secretly set up a base near the China-Myanmar border, indicating foreign support, hostile foreign support from the outside. So there could be a deliberate conspiracy to back the Meitei armed groups to further destabilize the region, right? Now see, what do the Naga insurgents want? Their vision has always been Greater Nagaland, to create Nagalim by merging all the Naga inhabited areas. Historically, even Meiteis have seen Nagas as a threat, because if Nagas ever realize their goal, if the insurgents realize their goal, then large part of Manipur would be broken away. The Naga inhabited hill districts will be broken away to create Nagaland, right, or Nagalim. So historically, there has been rivalry and clashes between them as well. There have been clashes between Kuki and Nagas as well. But what's interesting is that the Nagas allegedly giving support to the Meiteis. So this gives rise to a possible situation where different groups are forming an axis, they're forming a nexus, maybe, possibly at foreign behest, at the involvement of foreign actors. So this gives rise to a lot of serious challenges and concerns for India, because it's important to note that Manipur state government actually had signed a suspension of operations agreement. Basically, it had signed a ceasefire agreement with the Kuki armed groups. But last year, Manipur government, which blamed the Kuki-Zo community and labeled them as refugees and illegal migrants, it suspended the ceasefire agreement. Manipur state government said that the Kukis are allowing Myanmar's Zomi refugees and other refugees to come in, encroach upon tribal land, and it alleged that they are cultivating drugs as well. These allegations have been strongly denied by the Kuki-Zo community leaders. Right? They say they have only accepted the refugees, supported them because of the situation in Myanmar, the humanitarian situation in Myanmar. Because Kuki community is related to the Zomi community, just like Mizos are connected to the Chins, largely on cultural grounds, familial grounds, and humanitarian grounds. Some of the refugees might have been accepted, but it's been alleged that the Kukis have allowed the refugees to encroach upon the land here in the forested areas and even cultivate drugs. These allegations are strongly denied. They are rejected by the Kuki-Zomi outfits. So the cancellation of the ceasefire agreement also became a trigger, which essentially meant that now the Manipur government and the state forces might target the Kuki armed groups, while they will not act against the Meitei armed outfits, which possibly might be getting support from Naga insurgents. So this has been the complex demographic, ethnic and security situation in Nagaland and Manipur, and this has serious implications for India's security interests. So paying attention to this development and understanding the entire dynamics with the background is very relevant for our GS paper 3 under internal security. Now let's look at the next important article from page number 13. This article refers to the Chabahar port, the strategic Chabahar port in Iran, which has been in the news over the last few days. It has been reported that an Indian company, India Ports Global Limited, has signed a contract, a long-term 10-year contract with an Iranian port operator, which allows India Ports Global Limited to continue operating the Shahid Beheshti terminal at the Chabahar port, which is built by India. As soon as this deal was made public by both India and Iran, the US has threatened sanctions against the Chabahar port project and against Indian companies like India Ports Global Limited. So in this context, we should understand the relevance of the Chabahar port, the developments related to it, the significance of Chabahar port to India, and the threat of American sanctions and how it can affect India-Iran relations. So let's take a look at this. If you look at the map, this is where Chabahar port is located. It occupies a strategic location in the West Asia region. Right? This is the Persian Gulf, around which all the major oil exporting nations are located, from Iraq to Kuwait to Saudi Arabia, Qatar, UAE, etc. So India, which is heavily dependent on oil imports and gas imports from West Asia, relies heavily on this trading route, this shipping route. that passes from Persian Gulf through Hormuz Strait. This is the narrow Hormuz Strait, which is a choke point. Then it crosses into Gulf of Oman and Arabian Sea and then reaches the Indian Ocean. This is a vital route, an extremely critical shipping route for India, particularly for its energy supplies from West Asian countries. So at the opening of Gulf of Oman, this is where we have this deep water, warm water port called Chabahar port of Iran. It's because of its location that Chabahar port becomes strategically vital. It is the closest Iranian port to India. By the way, during British India, right, there has been a historical cultural connection with this part of Iran and with India. See, this is the Sistan Balochistan province of Iran. Just like you have Balochistan here in Pakistan, this is the Sistan Balochistan province of Iran. So historically, India has been connected with Sistan Balochistan province. There is a cultural link, a cultural connection as well. For example, Urdu and even Hindi were spoken in parts of Sistan Balochistan province. There have been Persian influences from the region on India as well, right? So there is a local version of the Panchatantra which became very popular in Sistan Balochistan. So there are many deep-rooted cultural links that binds India with this region, right? Post-independence, the region remains connected to India culturally, historically, and it happens to be the closest Iranian port to India. So that itself is enough to highlight the strategic significance of Chabahar port. There is a historical cultural connection with the region. It's a deep water port present in warm seas, right? There is no disruption. It's located in an open sea with clear access to Gulf of Oman and Arabian Sea. So cargo ships, commercial ships can easily access Chabahar port, thus increasing its commercial value and strategic significance. And another important point is that hardly around 100 kilometers away in Pakistan, you have the Gwadar port in the Balochistan province. This has been developed by China as part of the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor project, which is part of its Belt and Road Initiative. So China has invested heavily in the CPEC project and developed the Gwadar port over here that links Pakistan with the Xinjiang province of China. China has placed a lot of hopes on CPEC project, which allows China to directly access Arabian Sea and Indian Ocean without depending on Malacca Strait near Singapore. Because Malacca Strait would be a choke point for China, a weakness for China. So this allows China to reduce its dependency on Malacca Strait and create alternate routes to West Asia, from where it can easily draw oil and gas supplies. So China and Pakistan are very proactive when it comes to the CPEC project and the Gwadar port project. On similar lines, India has been very proactive with its involvement in the Chabahar port project. It is seen as a gateway, not just to Iran, but to Afghanistan and especially to Central Asia. These Iranian ports, not just Chabahar, but even Bandar Abbas and other Iranian ports, could help us connect with Russia and create alternate routes to Eurasia. So there's a lot of potential that exists here, a lot of strategic relevance that exists here for India. So let's quickly look at India-Iran relations and how India got involved in the Chabahar port project in the first place. See, if you look at the period before 1979, prior to 1979, India-Iran were not actually very good friends. From 1951 to 1979, India-Iran weren't very close to each other because of the Cold War divide. During the Cold War, India initially was non-aligned. We were championing the non-aligned movement. We neither chose the American power bloc, right? We neither aligned with the communist power bloc led by Soviet Union. India remained neutral, led a third world order and established the non-aligned movement. Whereas Iran, under the rule of the Shah of the Pahlavi dynasty, right, was closely aligned with the United States. See, today US and Iran might be arch rivals and enemies, but believe it or not, before 1979, they were very close friends, very close allies. It was alleged that it was the US which installed the Shah's regime to promote American influence and democratic Western influence the Shah's regime here was installed and supported by the US through its intelligence agencies. So until 1979, Iran would essentially behave like a puppet of the US, while India was non-aligned. So clearly we were on the opposite sides of the Cold War, right? Then in 1971, India abandoned non-alignment during liberation of Bangladesh as the US became hostile to India. As US supported Pakistan in the 71 war and threatened India with consequences, India was forced to abandon non-alignment, and Prime Minister Indira Gandhi aligned India with Soviet Union in 1971. So we shifted to the polar opposite side during the Cold War. So if Iran was an American ally, India would essentially become a close country with the Soviet Union. So until 1979, we never had an opportunity to build close relations between India and Iran. Then in 1979, there was a big development. There was a rebellion against the American interference and the Shah's regime. Right? The people of Iran led a revolution, popularly called the Iranian Revolution. This was a rebellion against the Shah's rule, who was seen as a puppet of the US. But eventually, this revolution was hijacked by the Shia clerics, the extremists, the Shia conservative extremists. The clerics under Ayatollah al-Khamenei would hijack this revolutionary movement and toppled the Shah's regime. And thus, Iran would become a Shia conservative state. It would come under the rule of the Shia conservatives, with the Ayatollah becoming the supreme leader. Ayatollah al-Khamenei would establish himself as a supreme leader, with the Iranian government reporting to the Ayatollah. So thus Iran became a religious, theological, conservative, radical state and emerged as the Shia power of the region. So now as well, India-Iran did not have any common ground to come together. Throughout 1980s as well, India-Iran were pretty cold towards each other. We weren't good friends, we weren't enemies as well. All right? But everything changed in the 1990s. In the 1990s, India-Iran relations underwent a very big transformative change, starting with the visit of Prime Minister P.V. Narasimha Rao. In 1993, as the Cold War had come to an end, Soviet Union had collapsed, disintegrated, P.V. Narasimha Rao started diversifying India's foreign policy. He had launched the Look East policy to focus on Southeast and East Asian countries. He established official ties with Israel. Right? India was focusing on many countries in Africa, Latin America, and other parts of the world. So Iran was a priority nation for India, given what was happening in Afghanistan. By 1990s, Afghanistan was staring at a civil war. Right? The Afghan Mujahideen, who were backed by Pakistan and US in the 80s, they had defeated the Soviet forces who had occupied Afghanistan. They had retreated by 1989. So the Mujahideen fighters had largely taken over the country, and the Afghan government was constantly under threat. Radical extremists were running over the country, and a new outfit called Taliban had just been formed. So Afghanistan was becoming a serious concern for India, where Pakistan was using Taliban and the Mujahideen to create security challenges for India in Kashmir, in Punjab, etc. Similarly, for Iran, the rise of the Mujahideen, the rise of the Taliban in Afghanistan was a threat, because Iran is a Shia power, whereas Taliban and the Mujahideen were Sunni extremists, and the two acting at the behest of Pakistan. So Iran was concerned about the nexus between Pakistan and, let's say, Taliban and Mujahideen in Afghanistan. So it was a natural concern that India shared with Iran. So this opportunity was used by P.V. Narasimha Rao to pay a historic visit to the country in 1993, which opened a new era in the relationship. Based on this, India-Iran built a closer relationship. And in fact, in 1996, when Taliban captured the country in Afghanistan, right, they toppled the Afghan government and Taliban regime was established, India-Iran worked together with Russia to counter the Taliban. It's reported that India, Iran and Russia, they together sponsored the Northern Alliance to counter the Taliban regime which had taken over Afghanistan. So basically, in the security domain, with regard to counter-terrorism, with regard to the strategic concerns both of them had, right, this created an opportunity for India-Iran to come together. They were concerned about Pakistan's involvement with terrorist groups. They were mutually concerned about the Taliban regime, which had established itself in Afghanistan in 1996. Obviously, it was a threat for Russia as well, right? Because Afghanistan would border Central Asian countries, which were former Soviet republics. So Russia was concerned about the extremist influence in Central Asia. So India, Russia, Iran would work together from 96 to 2001 to counter the Taliban by sponsoring the Northern Alliance, which was a rival of the Taliban. The Northern Alliance was a collection of northern Afghan tribes and ethnic groups. So India, Iran, Russia would collectively sponsor this coalition of Tajiks, Uzbeks, and other Central Asian ethnic groups in northern parts of Afghanistan as a counterbalance to the Taliban regime in Kabul, which was backed by Pakistan. So from here onwards, close strategic relations was built between India and Iran. Then in 2001, Prime Minister Vajpayee paid a historic visit to Iran. PM Vajpayee took forward the relationship and continued the legacy of Narasimha Rao. And this led Iranian president to be invited to India in 2003 as the chief guest for our Republic Day parade. So during this visit of the Iranian leader to India, the Delhi Declaration was signed in the year 2003. Understood? It was under the Delhi Declaration that finally Chabahar port project was finalized. It was initially proposed during Narasimha Rao's visit in 1993. India-Iran were considering joint involvement in the development of Chabahar port. Iran wanted India to be involved in it. It was further taken forward when Vajpayee visited the country, and now when the Iranian leader came to India as the chief guest for the Republic Day parade in 2003, Delhi Declaration was adopted, under which Chabahar port project was formally launched between India and Iran. So since then, India has invested millions of dollars, close to $500 million, to build this strategic port. The Manmohan Singh government later would continue the initiative. Under Prime Minister Manmohan Singh, India gave a lot of priority for Afghanistan and Central Asia. Because by 2001, things had changed in Afghanistan. The Taliban regime had been thrown out by the US coalition forces which had invaded the country after the 9/11 attacks. So there was an Afghan civilian government, a democratic civilian government which had been installed with American support. This was an ideal situation for India. So India capitalized on this and built very close relations with the Afghan government. We invested up to $3 billion in various reconstruction and development projects. And one important project executed by the Manmohan Singh government was the Zaranj-Dilaram road that you can see over here. It's also called Route 606. Route 606 is a key highway built by India between Dilaram and Zaranj, which is a border town on the Iran-Afghanistan border. Many Indians have lost their lives in contributing this to this project. For example, Indian workers from the BRO, Border Roads Organization, which executed the project, some of them were killed by Taliban. A few ITBP commandos who were protecting the project and the workers, they were killed as well during terror attacks. So quite a few Indians have sacrificed their lives while executing this critical project. India's ambition was to use the Chabahar port, which had been built by India and Iran, connect this with a railway line to Zahedan over here. Zahedan is a border town along the Iran-Afghanistan border. So through the Chabahar railway line, the idea was to link with Zaranj-Dilaram highway, extend this to Kabul and extend this to Central Asia. So that finally India would have connectivity, not just with Iran, but Afghanistan and Central Asia as well. Because due to Pakistan, India doesn't have connectivity with Afghanistan and Central Asia. See, ideally, if Pakistan had not occupied Gilgit-Baltistan, if it was not under the illegal occupation of POK, Pakistan occupied Kashmir, India would have had a border with Afghanistan here at the Wakhan corridor in the Hindu Kush mountains. From here, from Wakhan corridor, we could have accessed Central Asia. But this is no longer possible because since 1947, Pakistan is under the illegal occupation of these territories. Right? So there is no direct land connectivity. So only way for India to connect with Afghanistan would be via Pakistan, if Pakistan gives transit access. Problem is, Pakistan would never give such access, and even if it gives the access, it's never a reliable route. Given the tensions between the two countries and the presence of terrorist groups which might target these projects, any route through Pakistan is never viable. So India came up with this idea, worked with Iran to create an alternate route to bypass Pakistan. because we had very good relations with the Afghan government. We still have very good ties with Central Asian countries, and they are all blessed with resources. They are ready to share the resources with India. India is ready to invest and harness the resources. Only problem was the lack of connectivity. That's why our policy to Central Asia is called Connect Central Asia. Focus is on connectivity. And Chabahar route is the primary focus of connecting with Central Asia. So I think this explains the relevance, the importance of the project. And also, the other relevance of the Chabahar port and other Iranian ports is that this could further our connection to Russia and Eurasia as well through the INSTC project, the International North-South Transport Corridor. This could be interlinked with the Chabahar port, and it could be branched off into Afghanistan and Central Asia, which will create multiple diverse trade routes and networks for India. INSTC is a proposed alternate route that will link India with Iranian ports like Bandar Abbas and also Chabahar port. From here, we can reach the Caspian Sea through Iran's territory and reach Azerbaijan and use the inland navigation created by Azerbaijan and Iran and Russia in the Caspian Sea and send the goods directly to Russia and to further to Europe, which is a much shorter route, a safer route compared to the current route through Suez Canal. The Suez Canal route, Red Sea route, is much more riskier because it's a choke point as well. So this could create a shorter route, a more effective, more efficient and an alternate, a safer route as well. So this is something India, Iran, Russia have been pursuing. So Chabahar port could be very well part of INSTC project as well. From Caspian Sea, the route could be diverted towards Central Asia and Afghanistan, creating wider regional connectivity. So there is a lot of potential to this project. But however, India has faced many challenges over the project because of constant tensions between US and Iran. See, India started out the project after the Delhi Declaration. We built the strategic highway, the Route 606 in Afghanistan as well. Chabahar port became operational in some years. But problem was the persistent tensions between these two rivals. Given Iran's enmity with Israel and how US backs Israel, the tensions have only increased over the last couple of decades. Iran started pursuing nuclear weapons as a security cover against the American threat. Iran swore to wipe out Israel from the map. These rivalries led Iran to pursue nuclear weapons, which has been targeted by US and Israel as well. So these tensions that broke out by 2008 created a major problem for India. India, Iran were very close right now, but because of the American pressure, there was stress on India-Iran relations. Understood? The then Manmohan Singh government was pressurized by the US to cut off oil imports from Iran because the US was targeting Iran with sanctions. It had placed economic sanctions on Iran's oil industry in order to cripple the Iranian economy so that it can't focus on the nuclear weapons program. But back then, Iran was the second largest oil supplier to India after Saudi Arabia, right? So there was no way India could end oil imports from Iran. So the Manmohan Singh government withstood the American pressure, refused to follow the American sanctions. As a concession to the US, because close ties with US also had begun by then, India agreed to drop the IPI pipeline project, Iran-Pakistan-India pipeline project, which was supposed to be an underwater gas pipeline from Iran, Pakistan to India. In return, the US offered the Tapi pipeline project to India that would pass through Afghanistan and Pakistan from Turkmenistan. So India took up the Tapi pipeline project, dropped IPI to satisfy the Americans, but we clearly took a stand, refused to follow American sanctions because due to India's independent foreign policy, we usually don't follow unilateral sanctions. Given the strategic relations with Iran and importance of Iran for India's energy security, India continued the oil imports through alternate payments. We used alternate currencies, we made rupee-based payments as well, and continued the oil trade with Iran. So India-Iran strategic relations were protected. But the Manmohan Singh government managed to get an exemption for Chabahar port. Since India-US relations were also improving, right, India made it clear that it will not stop the trade, it will bypass the sanctions, but we will drop the IPI pipeline, right? So in return, Tapi pipeline was offered, plus the exemption to Chabahar port was also secured, that American sanctions will not hit the Chabahar port project. So until 2015, this remained a challenge. The American pressure was constantly affecting India-Iran relations, but India was navigating it well by ignoring the American pressure and by not following the American sanctions. In 2015, there was a big breakthrough when the Iran nuclear deal was signed, the JCPOA, Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. It was negotiated by the P5+1 countries with Iran. P5 are the 5 permanent members of UN Security Council, plus 1 would be Germany. European Union was also part of the negotiations. So they struck the Iran nuclear deal, according to which Iran would shut down its nuclear enrichment. It would shut down the nuclear centrifuges. It would hand over the highly enriched uranium, which was weapons grade uranium. And in return, it would get support from European countries in civilian nuclear research. Low grade uranium would be provided for medical research, medical purposes, and for electricity generation. But the weapons grade uranium would be taken over by IAEA and the European powers which were part of the deal. So in return, US agreed to lift the sanctions. So from 2015 to 2018, US sanctions were lifted. US-Iran relations were becoming normal thanks to the nuclear deal, thanks to the JCPOA. This was a golden time for India, right? Because there was no US pressure anymore. We need not choose between US and Iran. So India went completely ahead. And we even signed a tripartite agreement in 2016 with Iran and the then Afghan government. We established the Chabahar trade corridor through this tripartite agreement. Shipments started between India, Chabahar and Afghanistan and vice versa. So this was becoming one of the most vital trade routes which would enhance India's influence and our connectivity to Central Asia. Potentially, this could rival the Belt and Road Initiative of China as well, at least in this region. But all of a sudden, things took a turn in 2018 under the new US President Donald Trump. Donald Trump revived the tensions with Iran. Without any proof or evidence, he blamed Iran for violating the nuclear deal and alleged that Iran was still secretly developing nuclear weapons in violation of JCPOA. Based on these allegations, the US quit the nuclear deal. The US withdrew from the JCPOA and it brought back sanctions against Iran. Crippling sanctions were brought back, targeting Iran, and this time the Trump administration exerted a lot of pressure on the Modi government in India. And unfortunately, the Indian government caved under American pressure. The Indian government was forced to zero out oil imports from Iran. India cut off oil imports from Iran because of the American threat and American pressure, and as a result, Iran was angry with India. Iran was very angry with India that India gave up its independent foreign policy position. Probably for the first time, we were following unilateral sanctions and we had cut off our oil imports. So as a result, Iran started retaliating against India. Iran dropped India from the Chabahar railway project. The Chabahar railway line, which was supposed to connect the Chabahar port with Zahedan, which would further link with Zaranj-Dilaram highway. This key railway project, right, it was cancelled by Iran. It dropped India essentially, and Iran has tried to build the Chabahar railway on its own, and China has shown interest to get involved in Chabahar railway line project. So as a result, India-Iran relations got affected as India cut off oil imports under American pressure, right? This put a shadow on the utility of the Chabahar port project. But still, India Ports Global Limited, it had a contract to operate the terminal, the Shahid Behesti terminal at Chabahar port. So even though the Indian company continued to run and maintain the port, the only problem was our relations were affected very badly. Plus in 2021, a new challenge came up for India. The Taliban was back in power. Afghan government was thrown out following the withdrawal of the American troops, and Taliban regime was back in power. So since then, there is no certainty as to what will happen to the Chabahar port project and this trade corridor which India was dreaming of. So now the new contract which we have signed, the long-term contract, which allows the Indian company to maintain the port for 10 years, is of great relevance. Through the deal, India has promised $120 million of investments, another $250 million worth of loans to help expand the Chabahar port and the terminal that India has built. So there is still hope for the project as India-Iran relations are reviving. India-Iran relations are coming back on track, right? India-Iran are getting closer again, and the exemption that we had for Chabahar port had been continued by the next American administrations. The Trump administration as well had not targeted the Chabahar port. Even the Biden administration until now had not targeted Chabahar port project with the Western sanctions. But now, after the long-term deal was announced by India and Iran, right, the US administration has issued a statement, the State Department, threatening sanctions against the project which might hurt the Indian company, the India Ports Global Limited. So this again raises the same challenge for India. So there are great opportunities that arise from this project, right? It's a great way for India to diversify the trade routes, access Central Asia, Eurasia region, connect better with Afghanistan as well, and even counter the Chinese influence. But there are multiple challenges present. The challenge of extremism, terrorism backed by Pakistan in the region remains a threat. The Taliban regime in Afghanistan remains a concern. The Chinese influence with Iran remains a concern. The American pressure over sanctions remains a concern. So while these challenges remain, there are great opportunities for India as well. So it would be interesting to see how India would manage these conflicting objectives. Now coming to one last mains article, a small update with regard to Central Asia. There is a disturbing development from a Central Asian country, which is Kyrgyzstan. See, in Kyrgyzstan, there are thousands of Indian medical students. Almost 14,000 plus Indian medical students go to study here. I'll explain why so many Indian students prefer Kyrgyzstan and other Eurasian countries, Central Asian and Eurasian countries. So here there has been a very disturbing development. A few days ago, a clash broke out between local Kyrgyz people and few foreign students from Pakistan and Egypt. This has escalated into a full-out attack on foreign students, including Indian students, Bangladeshi students, and others. You might have seen visuals on social media, news reports, where hostels have been targeted by the local mobs, right? Students and the youth who are studying here from foreign countries, they have been targeted, beaten up. There are reports of killings and rapes as well, which has not been confirmed as of now. So following this sudden escalation in the threat for the Indian community, the Indian embassy in Bishkek has issued an advisory. It has urged the Indian students to remain within their hostel premises, to not leave the hostel and venture outside. And it has said the situation is coming back under control as Kyrgyz authorities are acting against these mobs which targeted the foreign medical students. Now the topic is relevant for us because under GS paper 2, we should know about the Indian community abroad, the Indian diaspora. Their safety, their well-being is a concern for the Indian state, right? So whatever affects the Indian nationals abroad is of direct concern for us as well. So you should know why Indians go in such large numbers to Kyrgyzstan. See, in India, medical education is unaffordable for most families, right? We hardly have 90,000 or close to 1 lakh medical seats, which is nowhere enough to satisfy the demand, right? Plus, the medical courses in India are very expensive. Just to finish your MBBS, you'll need up to 1 crore rupees if you don't get a free government seat. Not many families can afford such kinds of donation, medical fees and the tuition fees, which makes medical education in India very difficult and challenging for most aspirants. That is the reason why thousands of Indians, they prefer several other countries. From China to Central Asia, to Russia, Ukraine, even Georgia, right? These are some of the most preferred countries as medical education is cheaper, qualitatively it's better as well, and it is internationally recognized. It is recognized by the WHO. All right. Apparently in Kyrgyzstan especially, they have better facilities, better hands-on experience. So thousands of students from India go to China, many Central Asian countries including Kyrgyzstan, Georgia, Ukraine. You might remember when the Ukraine war broke out. It was primarily Indian medical students who were stuck in Ukraine, who were evacuated under Operation Ganga. Even in Russia, there are thousands of Indian medical students. Because it is cheaper, They have better facilities, better exposure. It's internationally recognized degree, right? There are English language courses available. There is a very healthy student to teacher ratio. Because of all these factors, countries like Kyrgyzstan are highly preferred by Indian medical students, right? So almost 14,000 plus Indian students are studying here, and India has very good relations with Kyrgyzstan. In fact, all 5 Central Asian countries, right? Look at the Central Asia region here. All the 5 Central Asian countries are very close to India. They were all part of former Soviet Union, be it Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan. All 5 Central Asian countries. They share historical links with India. If you look at the Fargana Valley, from where Babur came to lay the foundation of the Mughal Empire in India, right? So Fargana Valley is here on the borders of Uzbekistan, Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan. Hinduism, Buddhism has traveled towards Central Asia through this route, through the ancient Silk route, right? Islam has had an influence from Central Asia on India. So there is a mutual cultural exchange that has happened. Historically, there were trade routes, trade connections that existed. So there has been a close connection between the two regions, and under the Soviet Union, India was closely working with all these Soviet states or Soviet republics. Several of the defense imports that we were making from Soviet Union, they were being produced in factories located in these countries. So post collapse of Soviet Union, post 1991, India built very good relations with all these new countries that were born. They are all blessed with resources, be it Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, right? They have hydrocarbon reserves. They have, some of them have uranium, like Kazakhstan has a lot of uranium resources. Even Kyrgyzstan has a bit of uranium resources. They are blessed with several precious minerals, from iron to copper to cobalt, right? They are blessed with few critical minerals and rare earth elements as well. They are blessed with hydropower. So they have immense resource potential which India is looking to tap. That is why we have a dedicated policy called Connect Central Asia policy. The focus is to establish connectivity so that the trade network can be established. That's why Chabahar port is critical. That's why Afghanistan is critical. That's why our relations with Iran is critical to connect with Central Asia. So with a country with such good relations, it's very unfortunate that this incident has happened. So you might ask, why is this happening? Why are the local Kyrgyz people, who are usually very friendly to foreigners, why are they attacking foreign students? They have not just attacked Indian students. The primary clash, according to reports, broke out between Kyrgyz youth and Pakistani and Egyptian students, foreign students, right? According to reports, this is happening largely because, one, Kyrgyz economy is it has taken a big hit. All right? Kyrgyzstan doesn't have a well-diversified economy. It relies heavily on Russian funding. It relies on foreign medical students to bring some revenue, on tourism, etc. It has very limited sources of revenue, right? So the COVID-19 pandemic, Russia-Ukraine war, they've all dealt a severe hit to the economy of Kyrgyzstan. Tourism was disrupted. Plus the war in Ukraine has diverted Russian funding. Russia was the biggest source of FDI. So Russian investments have dried out and migration problem has begun. Because a lot of Russian youth, they fled the country when Russia made it mandatory for the youth to enroll for the armed forces. You might remember Putin ordered a large inscription program where all the Russian youth who were able to fight were asked to enroll into the armed forces. This triggered an exodus of Russian men. They fled into other countries like Kyrgyzstan, for example. So this has increased the migration burden, where foreigners are seen with suspicion by local Kyrgyz people. Plus, the local Kyrgyz people believe that foreigners are entitled, they are richer, or they are more well off. There is a clear divide, which is very apparent. So, one of the local clashes between the Egyptian students and the Kyrgyz mobs has escalated, leading to large-scale attacks on all medical students, especially against Pakistani, Indian and Bangladeshi students as well. Right? So, in general, there is no enmity, no difference as such between Indians and the Kyrgyz people. Kyrgyz people are very friendly. We have had very good relations with the country. So this is an abnormality. This is largely because of the migration problem, the economic problem which has developed, and also the mismanagement of the relations between the locals and the foreign students. So this is where Indian government, the foreign ministry and the embassy here, right, have to play a very proactive role with other affected countries. We will have to work with Pakistan because Pakistan is also very badly affected. Bangladesh, Egypt and other countries, their students have been affected. We will have to work with them to influence the Kyrgyz government to build better relations between the locals and the students and ensure that our community is protected. This is a developing story. Like, if there are any big developments, we will cover this again. But this is something you should be aware of. You should know our interest in Central Asia and Kyrgyzstan and the reason why students prefer Kyrgyzstan and what has happened. What is the reason behind these attacks, mob attacks against medical students. Now we come to the last section, the prelim section, where we have few small articles. Let's take a quick look. On page number 9, there's an article referring to calcium carbide. Calcium carbide is a banned toxic chemical which is used in the artificial ripening of fruits and vegetables. This is extremely hazardous for human health. It is banned in India by the Food Safety Standards Authority of India. So according to the article, FSSAI has ordered all the traders and merchants in India to ensure the strict ban on the usage of calcium carbide, which is used for artificial ripening of fruits and vegetables. It has asked the state-level food authorities to act strictly to enforce the legal provisions and punish those who are adulterating our fruits and vegetables with calcium carbide. So there can be a science-based question on calcium carbide and on the process of ripening of fruits and vegetables in your prelims. See, fruits and vegetables, they naturally ripen primarily due to the influence of ethylene gas. Fruits and vegetables, as they naturally ripen, they release the ethylene gas, which essentially helps in breaking down the polysaccharides, the complex compounds, into simple sugars, which basically ripens your fruit, right? The fruit becomes soft, the color changes, becomes more appealing, the taste becomes sweeter, right? That's the reason why you enjoy the fruit, because it has high sugar content. The factor responsible here is the ethylene gas, which triggers the enzymatic action in fruits and vegetables to break down the complex compounds, polysaccharides, into very simple sugars that turns the fruit soft, right? Edible, and it makes it appealing. It gives it a good texture, and more importantly, it gives it the sweetness. But naturally, fruits and vegetables may not ripen quickly, right? They may not ripen at a uniform rate. So this is always a problem for traders, vendors. So what they do, these profit-minded traders and vendors, they don't care about the impact on human health, and they use these artificial external stimuli to accelerate the ripening process. So they use certain chemicals such as ethifon or 2-chloroethyl phosphonic acid, and they also use calcium carbide very extensively, which produces the acetylene gas. Right? It triggers the same process, but however, it actually doesn't ripen the fruit or vegetable. It only changes the color. If you have noticed in the market, when you buy, let's say, bananas or papaya or even tomatoes or mangoes, on the outside they look very good. The color looks very good. Very even coloring would have come up, right? That itself is an indicator, because fruits don't ripen so evenly, right? If there is a naturally ripened fruit or vegetable, they will have different patches of colors, because ethylene gas would have a different impact on different corners of the fruit, right? But when it is artificially ripened with calcium carbide or even with ethifon, right, you will see a very even coloring of the fruit. The fruit looks very appealing with the same uniform color, right? So usually it means that it has been ripened with calcium carbide. That's an indicator. Like, you take banana for example, it will attain a beautiful yellow color, but still the stem will be green. And if you bite into it, it will actually be still raw. It will not have that sweetness, the taste, the soft texture will not be there. Because the fruit hasn't really ripened. They simply have changed the external color, the appearance, through this artificial ripening process. Understood? Now, this is extremely hazardous because calcium carbide, when consumed, has deadly consequences for human health. It's highly toxic. It is usually contaminated with arsenic and phosphorus substances, which are extremely dangerous for human health. Arsenic and phosphorus poisoning is a direct consequence of using calcium carbide to ripen fruits and vegetables. All right? It can lead to digestive distress. It can lead to an itch in your throat, or it can affect the mucosal lining of your intestine, causing irritation in your gastrointestinal system. It can lead to vomiting, diarrhea, dizziness. It can eventually affect your neurological system as well, leading to hypoxia. It can cause hypoxia, which can induce seizures or numbness or fatigue, confusion and even fainting or losing consciousness is possible, right? You lose the sensation in your legs and hands as well when you're exposed to high levels of calcium carbide, which can lead to a neurological condition called hypoxia, right? It cuts off the oxygen supply to the nervous system, causing general weakness, dizziness, fatigue, nausea, etc. When exposed to the eyes, for example, it can cause irritation. It can lead to irritation on your skin or rashes on your skin as well. So calcium carbide is absolutely dangerous, as it can lead to arsenic poisoning and phosphorus poisoning. So FSSAI has a strict ban on the usage of this adulterant. It's classified as an adulterant under the Food Adulteration Act 1954. It's banned by the FSSAI, and any violation can attract a jail term of 3 years with a fine. Problem is there is lack of enforcement at the ground level. Still, vendors and traders continue to use calcium carbide, and this poses a threat to the health of Indians. That is why FSSAI has called for a strict enforcement of the ban. Next, on page number 10, we have an article referring to India-UK relations. It's just a small update. See, India-UK are negotiating a free trade agreement. India-UK are discussing a free trade agreement which might be signed after the elections, after a new government is brought in India. So the article is referring to the progress that India-UK are making with regard to the FTA. But for me, the most important point in the article is the joint initiative between India-UK over the world's first malaria vaccine. As you know, malaria is a deadly disease, a vector-borne disease spread by mosquitoes. In tropical countries like India, African countries especially, malaria has a huge impact. It has a high mortality rate as well. So India-UK have a major initiative, a joint initiative through which they have developed and produced, mass-produced the world's first malaria vaccine. It's already helping many African countries, and you should know which are these vaccines. Which countries are benefiting from this joint India-UK initiative? There can be a prelims question here. So one is the RTSS vaccine developed by GSK, GlaxoSmithKline, a UK-based pharma company. This is being mass-produced by India's Bharat Biotech. The other is the R21 vaccine developed by the University of Oxford, which is being mass-produced by the Serum Institute of India. All right? So these are the two vaccines against malaria developed in the UK, being mass-produced in India, which is already being shipped to many African nations. African countries like Ghana, Kenya, Malawi are benefiting from it. And recently, Cameroon became the first country in the world to initiate a mass rollout, to launch a mass rollout of the vaccine against malaria for children. It's been made part of the immunization for children in the African country of Cameroon, right? So that is how India-UK partnership is helping African countries to fight malaria. Coming to the last article for today, 3 African countries which have been in the news, Burkina Faso, Mali and Niger, they have finalized an agreement to form a new alliance in West Africa called the Confederation of the Alliance of Sahel States. A new confederation, a new grouping has been set up, and this is of great concern. The reason is these 3 countries have recently witnessed a military coup. The military junta has taken over by toppling the governments here, right? So the entire Sahel region has been witnessing a lot of destabilization. See, this is the African Sahel. It stretches from the Atlantic over here in West Africa, from Senegal and Mauritania, and stretches all the way across to the Red Sea, including Eritrea, Sudan, Chad, Niger, Mali, Burkina Faso, etc. This is the African Sahel region, also called the Maghreb region. So recently here, 3 countries, these 3 countries, they went through a military coup. The military dictatorship has thrown out the regimes. The military regime, they have thrown out the dictators that ruled the countries here, and they have captured power and they have established authoritarian military regimes. All right? These are the countries which are also affected by radicalism and terrorism. In fact, these were all French colonies at one point. France had colonized these parts of North and West Africa. So France has been a traditional power. It had been involved in fighting terrorism as well. Until recently, France, along with UK and US, they were leading Operation Barkhane to counter the terrorism in the region by assisting the dictatorial regimes in Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso. But recently, Russia has started stepping up its influence. Russia has backed the military regimes over here, helped them topple the governments, which led France to quit the military operation. France has ended Operation Barkhane. France has withdrawn its counter-terror operation. Even UK and USA have almost ended their counter-terrorist operation in the region. So this creates a fertile ground for terrorism to flourish. And Russia has entered with close relations with these military regimes. And Russian private mercenaries like the Wagner Group have become very influential in these authoritarian countries. And now these three military regimes have come together to form a grouping called Confederation of the Alliance of Sahel States. That's why I said it's a concerning development. So please make a note of this. There can be a question because UPSC always prefers such topics from Africa, especially conflict-related topics from Africa is a favorite for UPSC in prelims. So on this note, I would like to conclude the discussion for today. Please look at the mains practice questions. Take down the questions. It's all based on what we have studied. So write an answer to these questions using the points I mentioned. Try to build a proper structure based on the flow that I use in my discussion, and write an answer and post the answers in the comment section. So that is it for today. I hope you guys have liked the session, understood all the key topics we have studied, right? It's been a long session with a comprehensive discussion. So the idea is to cover these topics end to end so that you don't need any other reference after watching these sessions. So if you think the sessions are benefiting you, do let us know in the comments, press the like button, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. That is it today. Thanks for watching. I'll see you tomorrow. Have a good day.